The wind howled through the pine trees as Marcus stood at the window of the mountain cabin, watching the snow begin to fall. In 3 hours, a woman he'd never met would arrive to become his wife. The arrangement had been made by their families, a practical solution to practical problems. She needed security. He needed someone to share the isolated life he'd chosen after the accident that had taken everything from him. Love was not part of the equation. Love, he decided 2 years ago, was something he no longer deserved. The cabin was pristine, almost sterile in its cleanliness. Marcus had spent the past week preparing it, scrubbing floors that were already clean, organizing shelves that were already organized. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on what was to come. The large stone fireplace dominated the living room, and he'd already stacked enough firewood to last through the winter. Everything was ready. Everything was in its place. A cold, efficient life awaited them both. His lawyer had handled most of the arrangements. Elena Rossi was 28, 5 years younger than Marcus. She was in debt, caring for a sick younger brother, and had exhausted every other option. The marriage would provide her with financial stability and health insurance for her brother. In return, Marcus would have companionship of sorts. Someone to help maintain the cabin and share the long, quiet evenings. They'd signed papers. They'd agreed to terms. It was a business transaction dressed up in wedding clothes. Marcus caught his reflection in the window glass. The scar running down the left side of his face had faded somewhat, but it was still prominent, a permanent reminder of the fire that had destroyed his restaurant and killed 2 of his staff members. He'd been a celebrated chef once, owner of a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city. Then came the electrical fire, the evacuation he'd botched, the guilt that consumed him afterward. He'd survived. Maria and Thomas had not. Their families had forgiven him, but he could not forgive himself, so he'd sold everything, bought this cabin on the remote mountainside, and disappeared from the world that knew him. The sound of an engine struggling up the mountain road pulled Marcus from his thoughts. She was early. He felt his chest tighten as he moved away from the window, straightening his shirt, running a hand through his dark hair. This was it, the beginning of their arrangement. The car door slammed and he heard footsteps on the wooden porch. Before he could reach the door, it opened, and Elena Rossi stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air and snowflakes with her. She was smaller than he'd expected, with long dark hair plastered to her head from the snow, and large brown eyes that swept across the cabin before landing on him. She was carrying a single battered suitcase and a backpack that looked too heavy for her frame. "You must be Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "I'm Elena. Sorry I'm early. The weather report said the storm was coming in faster than expected, so I left the city at dawn." Marcus nodded, taking her suitcase. "It's fine. Let me show you to your room. You should warm up." He noticed she didn't smile, didn't offer her hand, didn't make any of the awkward small talk he'd been dreading. Instead, she simply followed him down the hallway to the bedroom he'd prepared for her, separate from his own. She glanced inside, taking in the simple furnishings, the window overlooking the valley, the handmade quilt on the bed. "It's nice," she said quietly. "Thank you. Bathroom is across the hall. Dinner will be ready at 6. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." She nodded, and he left her there, retreating to the kitchen where he could breathe again. He hadn't expected the encounter to unsettle him so much. There was something in her eyes, a sadness that mirrored his own, a resignation that made him wonder what her life had been like before this desperate arrangement. That first evening was awkward and silent. Marcus prepared a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, setting 2 places at the table. Elena emerged from her room wearing dry clothes, her hair pulled back, her face free of makeup. She ate quietly, methodically, and when he asked if she wanted seconds, she shook her head. "It was very good," she said. "You're a good cook. I used to be a chef," he replied, then immediately regretted revealing anything personal. "What made you stop?" she asked, her eyes curious but not prying. "I had my reasons," she nodded, accepting his boundaries, and they finished the meal in silence. Afterward, she insisted on cleaning up, and Marcus retreated to his room, feeling both relieved and strangely disappointed. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? A marriage in name only. No questions, no emotional entanglement, no risk of hurting anyone else. The days that followed established their routine. Marcus woke early to split wood and tend to the generator that powered the cabin. Elena kept the interior clean, prepared lunch while he made dinner, and spent her afternoons in her room on video calls with her brother, who was undergoing treatment at a hospital 3 hours away. They were polite to each other, careful, moving around the cabin like 2 strangers sharing an elevator. But Marcus began to notice things. Elena would stand at the kitchen window in the mornings, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring at the mountains with an expression of wonder on her face. She hummed, while she cleaned, old Italian songs that filled the cabin with unexpected warmth. She'd leave little notes around the house, reminding him that his favorite coffee was running low, or that the weather forecast called for heavy snow. Small gestures that suggested she was trying, in her own way, to make this strange arrangement work. One evening, 2 weeks into their marriage, Marcus was preparing dinner when Elena entered the kitchen. He'd been making pasta carbonara, one of his old signature dishes, and the smell filled the cabin. "Can I help?" she asked. He almost said no out of habit, but something made him pause. "You can chop the parsley." They worked side by side. and Elena asked him questions about cooking, about techniques and ingredients, with genuine interest. Before he knew it, Marcus was explaining the importance of timing, of tasting as you go, of respecting the ingredients. It was the most he'd spoken to her since she'd arrived. "You really loved it," Elena said softly. "Cooking. I can hear it in your voice." Marcus's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "I did what happened." He turned off the burner and faced her, the words coming before he could stop them. "2 people died in a fire at my restaurant. It was my responsibility to keep them safe, and I failed. So I stopped. I couldn't do it anymore." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My mother died of cancer when I was 17. For a year afterward, I couldn't listen to music. She loved music, sang all the time. When she was gone, every song felt like it was mocking me, reminding me of what I'd lost. I thought I'd never enjoy music again." "What changed?" Marcus asked. "My brother. He was just 12 and he was drowning in grief too. One day I found him crying in his room, and I didn't know what to do, so I started singing one of the songs my mother used to sing. I was terrible at it. My voice was shaking, but he stopped crying. He looked at me and said, 'Do it again.' So I did. And slowly, the music stopped hurting quite so much. It became something else, a way to keep her with us." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry about your restaurant. About Maria and Thomas. Those were their names, right? I heard the lawyer mention them." He nodded, surprised she'd remembered, surprised she'd cared enough to ask. They ate dinner together that night, and for the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. The winter deepened, and so did their tentative connection. Elena started joining Marcus on his morning walks through the snow-covered forest. She didn't talk much, but she seemed to find peace in the quiet beauty of the mountains. Marcus found himself pointing out animal tracks, sharing stories about the wildlife, teaching her how to read the landscape. She was a quick learner, observant and thoughtful. One night a fierce blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. The power went out, and they huddled near the fireplace, playing cards by candlelight. Elena taught him an Italian card game her grandmother had taught her, and Marcus found himself laughing for the first time in years. Elena's eyes lit up when she won, and she did a little victory dance that was so unself-conscious and joyful that Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "You should do that more often," Elena said, her voice soft. "Do what?" "Laugh. It suits you." Marcus looked away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. But later that night, lying in his bed, he realized he was smiling. As winter gave way to early spring, Marcus noticed Elena growing quieter, more withdrawn. She spent hours on the phone with the hospital, and he could hear the strain in her voice. One evening he found her crying in the kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand. "What's wrong?" he asked, his heart racing. "It's my brother, Luca. The treatment isn't working as well as they hoped. They want to try something more aggressive, but it's experimental and the insurance won't cover all of it. I don't know what to do." Her voice broke and she covered her face with her hands. Marcus didn't think. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing. He held her, one hand on her back, feeling her pain as if it were his own. "How much do you need?" he asked quietly. "Marcus. No, I can't ask you for that. This marriage was already supposed to take care of the basic costs. I can't ask for more." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "How much?" She pulled back, searching his face. $80,000. "But Marcus, that's too much. I'll find another way." "There is no other way, or you would have found it already. I have the money. Let me help." "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Because I know what it's like to lose people you love. Because I do want you to go through that if there is something I can do to stop it. Because despite my best efforts to keep you at arm's length, I care about what happens to you." The words hung in the air between them. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they looked different, grateful, tender. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar he'd been so self-conscious about. "You're a good man, Marcus. I wish you could see what I see." He covered her hand with his own, turning his face to kiss her palm. "I'm trying." The next morning Marcus made the necessary arrangements. Elena called the hospital with the news, and Marcus heard the joy in her voice as she spoke to her brother, telling him not to give up, that they had the money for the treatment. When she hung up, she found Marcus in his workshop and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she breathed against his ear. "Thank you so much. I will never forget this. Never." Marcus held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. This woman, who had come to him as part of a cold arrangement, had somehow become the most important person in his world. In the weeks that followed, their relationship transformed. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Elena told him about growing up in a loud, loving Italian family, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before her mother's illness derailed her plans. Marcus shared stories about his childhood, his passion for cooking, the years he'd spent perfecting his craft. He even told her about Maria and Thomas, about the guilt that haunted him, the nightmares that still woke him in the darkness. "It wasn't your fault," Elena said one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "You know that, right? The fire was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. But it wasn't your fault. I was responsible for them. I should have had better safety protocols. I should have checked the wiring. You should have been perfect. Marcus, you're human. Humans make mistakes. What happened was horrible, but punishing yourself forever won't bring them back. They wouldn't want this for you. I never knew them, but I'm certain of that. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. How can you be so sure? Because if something happened to me, I wouldn't want my brother to spend the rest of his life in isolation, refusing to be happy. I'd want him to live, to find joy, to honor my memory by choosing life, not by choosing grief. Her words pierced something deep inside him, a truth he'd been running from for 2 years. He turned to her, and in the starlight, Elena looked beautiful and fierce and real. Without thinking, he leaned in and kissed her. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and in that moment, Marcus felt something he thought he'd never feel again. Hope, the possibility of healing, the chance at a real future. When they pulled apart, Elena was smiling through her tears. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you, she whispered. This was supposed to be an arrangement. I know, Marcus said, pressing his forehead to hers. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I'm not. Their marriage became real after that night. They moved into the same room, sharing not just the cabin but their lives, their fears, their hopes. Marcus began cooking again, really cooking, and Elena was his eager student and his harshest critic. She made him laugh with her attempts at French cuisine and impressed him with her instinct for flavors. The cabin, once so cold and sterile, became a home filled with warmth and laughter and the smell of good food. Elena's brother's treatment was successful. The experimental therapy worked better than anyone had hoped, and by early summer, Luca was in remission. Elena wept with relief when she got the news, and Marcus held her, feeling his own eyes sting with grateful tears. They drove down the mountain to visit Luca in the hospital, and Marcus met the young man who meant everything to Elena. Luca was 15, with his sister's dark eyes and quick smile, and when he looked at Marcus he said, "Thank you for saving my sister too." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "She was drowning before she met you. Taking care of me, working 3 jobs, never sleeping." She wouldn't admit it, but she was falling apart. Now look at her. She's happy, really happy. So thank you for that. Marcus glanced at Elena, who was blushing and telling her brother to be quiet, and he felt his heart expand in his chest. This brave, resilient woman had saved him just as much as he'd saved her. That summer, Marcus made a decision. He started teaching cooking classes from the cabin, inviting small groups up the mountain to learn techniques and share meals. Elena helped him plan the curriculum, manage the bookings, and welcome the guests. It was nothing like his old restaurant, but it was something better. Something pure and joyful, untainted by the pressure and ego that had driven him before. One evening, after their last students had left, Elena found Marcus in the kitchen, staring at a photograph of his old restaurant that he'd kept hidden in a drawer for years. She slipped her hand into his. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not the way I thought I would. I miss the creativity, the satisfaction of feeding people, but I don't miss the pressure, the constant need to prove something. What we're doing now, it feels right. It feels like what cooking was always supposed to be for me." "I'm proud of you," Elena said, "for finding your way back to something you love, for letting yourself be happy again." Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I couldn't have done it without you. You changed everything, Elena. I was preparing for a cold, loveless existence, and you walked in and brought spring with you. You brought life. We saved each other," Elena said simply. "That's what love does." A year after Elena had first arrived at the cabin, they threw a party. Luca came, healthy and vibrant, full of teenage energy and terrible jokes. Elena's father and her aunts and uncles made the journey up the mountain, filling the cabin with Italian chatter and laughter. Even Marcus's old sous chef from the restaurant came, bringing news of the culinary world Marcus had left behind. They cooked together, all of them, creating a feast that lasted well into the night. As Marcus looked around at the crowded cabin, at Elena laughing with her family, at Luca teaching one of the ants how to play a card game, he felt a peace he'd never thought possible. The scar on his face would never disappear. The memories of Maria and Thomas would always be part of him, but he'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant making room for new joy alongside old sorrows. It meant choosing to live fully, to love completely, to honor the dead by embracing the gift of life. Later, when the guests had departed and the cabin was quiet again, Marcus and Elena stood on the porch under a canopy of stars. The mountains stretched out below them, dark and beautiful and full of secrets. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, her hand in his. "I'm thinking about fate," Marcus said. "About how the worst moment of my life led me to the best. About how losing everything taught me what actually matters. About how a practical arrangement turned into the greatest love I've ever known." Elena smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My grandmother used to say that God writes straight with crooked lines. I never understood what she meant until now." "What did she mean?" "That even when life seems to be going terribly wrong, even when we can't see the purpose or the plan, there's a pattern being woven. The threads look tangled and broken, but step back far enough, and you see the picture they were always meant to create." Marcus thought about this, about the fire and the guilt and the isolation that had brought him to this mountain. About Elena's desperation and her brother's illness and the arrangement that should have been cold and transactional. About how all those broken threads had woven together into something beautiful and unexpected. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now, though there had been a time when he thought he'd never say them again. I love you too, Alina replied. Thank you for letting me change everything. Thank you for seeing someone worth saving, Marcus answered. They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, to people who had come to the mountain expecting nothing and had found everything. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of all their tomorrows, and for the first time in years, Marcus welcomed it. The cold, loveless marriage he'd prepared for had become something he'd never dared to hope for, a true partnership, a genuine love, a real home. Alina had changed everything forever, and in doing so, she'd given him back the one thing he thought he'd lost in the fire himself.